The night my son's house burned to the ground, everyone called it a tragic accident. But as I stood there watching the
I
flames
told you this would
swallow
happen. You
everything
have
he
to listen
owned,
to me.
I
Mom,
felt
I can't do
something
this right now.
colder
Just leave it
and
alone.
fair. I knew. Because 3 weeks earlier, I had stood in that same living room, pointing at something that didn't make sense. And I told Ethan,
It looks
"This
like
isn't
you were
right.
correct, Mrs.
Something
Williams.
about this could go
The structural
very
damage
wrong."
is significant.
He laughed it off. Chloe rolled her eyes. Now the house was gone. And deep down, I wasn't asking what happened. I was asking who planned it. If you've ever had a gut feeling no one believed, I'd really like to hear it. Tap like if you've been there, and consider subscribing if stories like this stay with you. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? 3 weeks before the fire, I stood in Ethan's living room with a strange feeling I couldn't shake. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like something slightly out of place in a familiar room. The house itself was beautiful. New hardwood floors, fresh paint, that soft gray color Chloe insisted on calling modern coastal. Everything looked polished, curated, almost too perfect. But I've lived long enough to know that sometimes the things that look perfect are the ones you need to question the most. "Mom, you don't have to inspect everything like it's your job," Ethan said with a small laugh as he set down 2 mugs of coffee. I smiled, but I didn't answer right away. I wasn't inspecting. I was noticing. There's a difference. I walked slowly toward the wall near the kitchen entrance where a panel had been recently opened and patched. The paint there didn't quite match the rest, just a shade off, something most people would miss. But I didn't miss it. "Who did the electrical work?" I asked, running my fingers lightly along the edge of the panel. Ethan shrugged. "Just a contractor Chloe found. Guy named Jason Cole. He's been doing a bunch of upgrades for us." Something about the way he said it, casual, detached, made my chest tighten. "Did you get a second opinion?" I asked. Before Ethan could answer, Chloe's voice cut in from the kitchen. "Oh my God, Trevor," she said, her tone already sharp. "Not everything is a conspiracy. We hired a licensed contractor. It's fine." I turned slightly to face her. She stood there with her arms crossed, her posture stiff, her smile tight in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I didn't say it wasn't fine," I replied calmly. "I'm just asking questions." "Well, it sounds like you're questioning our judgment," she said. There it was, that subtle edge she always carried when it came to me. Ethan sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, everything's up to code. Jason handled it. We had an inspection and everything." "Who did the inspection?" I asked. Ethan hesitated, just for a second. "But I saw it." Chloe stepped forward quickly. "Look, we're not going to stand here and justify every decision we make about our own house. I'm not asking you to justify anything I said, keeping my voice even. I just want to understand why." She snapped. "So you can find something wrong with it?" The room went quiet. I glanced at Ethan, hoping just for a moment that he would step in, that he would say, "Hey, she's just trying to help." But he didn't. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck and gave me that same tired smile he always used when he wanted things to just go away. "Mom," he said gently, "it's really okay. We've got it under control." That sentence, I've heard it so many times in my life. And more often than not, it's said right before something falls apart. I nodded slowly, but I didn't move away from the wall. Instead, I leaned a little closer and looked at the panel again. "Do you mind if I take a closer look?" I asked. Chloe let out a short laugh. "Yes, actually, I do mind." Ethan gave her a look. "Chloe." "No," she said firmly. "This is exactly what I mean. She comes in here, acts like something's wrong, and suddenly we're supposed to let her tear apart the house. I'm not tearing anything apart, I said. I just want to check the wiring placement. That patch job doesn't look consistent with standard layout. Now Ethan frowned slightly. What do you mean? I pointed to the panel. The way this was closed up, it suggests the wiring was rerouted. But the position doesn't align with the usual load distribution for a kitchen expansion. Chloe rolled her eyes. That's a lot of big words to say. You don't trust the guy we hired? I don't trust what doesn't make sense, I said quietly. That seemed to land harder than I expected. Ethan shifted his weight. Ethan shifted his weight. Jason said, we needed to move some lines to support the new appliances. That may be true, I said, but if that's the case, the routing should follow a specific path. I tapped lightly on the wall. This feels improvised. We needed to move some lines to support the new appliances. That may be true, I said, but if that's the case, the routing should follow a specific path. I tapped lightly on the wall. This feels improvised. Improvised, Chloe repeated, her voice rising. Are you serious right now? I turned to her fully. I'm not trying to start a fight. Well, you are, she shot back. Because every time you come over, it's the same thing. You find something to criticize. I'm not criticizing, I said. I'm concerned for what she demanded. A wall. For your safety, I replied. That stopped her. For a second, but then her expression hardened again. We're fine, she said coldly. Nothing is going to happen. I held her gaze, then looked back at Ethan. I hope you're right, I said softly. I really do. He gave me a reassuring smile. We are. I promise. But something inside me didn't believe him. And it wasn't just the wall. It was the way Chloe kept interrupting. The way Ethan avoided eye contact when I asked specific questions. The way that contractor's name, Jason Cole, felt like something I should remember. Did you check his license? I asked one last time. Chloe let out a frustrated breath. Yes, Trevor, we checked everything. Can we please drop this? I nodded slowly. Of course, I said. But as I picked up my purse and headed toward the door, I paused for just a moment. I turned back. Ethan, I said gently, if something feels off even a little, you don't ignore it. You look into it. Okay. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. Okay, Mom. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, but instead of feeling warm, it felt distant, like I had just walked away from something important, something I couldn't yet name. And as I got into my car, I found myself glancing back at the house one more time. Everything looked normal, quiet, safe. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. Something about that house wasn't right. And the worst part, they didn't want to see it. I wish I could tell you that what happened that afternoon was unusual. That Chloe's tone caught me off guard. That Ethan's silence surprised me. But the truth is, it didn't. Because by then, I had already learned something about my son's life that no mother ever wants to fully accept. I was no longer someone he leaned on. I was someone he managed. And Chloe, she made sure of that. It hadn't always been this way. When Ethan was younger, he used to call me about everything. Big decisions, small decisions, it didn't matter. He wanted my opinion, my reassurance, my presence. Even in his 20s, after he moved out, he would still stop by on Sundays, sit at my kitchen table, and talk about his week, like nothing in the world mattered more. But somewhere along the way, that changed. And if I'm being honest, I know exactly when. It started after he married Chloe. At first, I told myself it was natural. That things shift when someone builds their own family. That a wife becomes the center, and a mother steps back. I respected that. I wanted to respect that. But what I didn't expect was how quickly I would become an outsider. It wasn't one big moment. It was 100 small ones. Phone calls that went unanswered. Plans that were forgotten. Decisions that had already been made before I even knew there was something to decide. And then there was the tone. Chloe had a way of speaking that sounded polite on the surface, but underneath there was always something else. Something dismissive. Something that said, "You don't belong in this conversation." "Ethan handles everything," she would say whenever I asked about anything practical. "We've got it covered. It's really not something you need to worry about." At first I let it go. Then I started noticing patterns, like the way Ethan would glance at her before answering me, or how his opinions slowly started to mirror hers, even when they contradicted things he used to believe in. And the finances. That was where it became harder to ignore. Ethan had always been careful with money. Not perfect, but responsible. He used to save, plan, think ahead. But after Chloe came into the picture, things shifted. There were renovations, expensive ones, new furniture every few months, vacations that didn't quite match what I knew about his income. I remember one evening, about a year before the fire, when he mentioned taking out a second loan. "A second loan?" I asked. "Con loan." "A second loan?" I asked gently. "For what?" Chloe answered before he could. "Investment upgrades?" she said with a bright smile. "We're increasing the property value." I nodded, but something didn't sit right, because it wasn't just what they were doing, it was how fast they were doing it, and how little Ethan seemed to question any of it. "Are you comfortable with that?" I asked him quietly when Chloe stepped out of the room. He hesitated, just like he had with the contractor. Then he gave me that same practiced smile. "Yeah, Mom. It's fine. Chloe's been handling most of it. She's really good with this stuff." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Chloe's been handling most of it. It wasn't just partnership. It was control. And over time, that control extended to me. I started feeling like I had to ask permission just to be part of my son's life. Visits became scheduled. Conversations became surface level. And any time I asked a question that went deeper than Chloe was comfortable with, there was tension, like that afternoon in the living room. After I left their house, I drove home in silence, replaying everything in my mind. The wall, the wiring, the way Chloe had reacted so quickly, so defensively. And Ethan, he hadn't backed me up, not once. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a long moment, my hands still resting on the steering wheel. There's a kind of loneliness that comes from losing someone who's still alive. That's what it felt like. Not a clean break, not a clear ending, just a slow, quiet distance that grows until you realize you don't know where you stand anymore. I got out of the car and walked inside, trying to shake the feeling off. "Maybe I'm overthinking this," I said out loud to myself. But the words didn't feel true, because deep down, I knew I wasn't reacting to just one thing. I was reacting to a pattern, a buildup, a series of small moments that, taken together, painted a picture I didn't want to see. And that picture became clearer a few days later. Ethan called me. That alone was unusual. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice slightly rushed. "Quick question, do you still have the contact for that insurance agent you used a few years back?" I frowned. "For the house?" "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice slightly rushed. "Quick question, do you still have the contact for that insurance agent you used a few years back?" I frowned. "For the house?" "Yeah," he said. "We're thinking about updating our policy. Chloe wants to make sure we're fully covered with all the renovations." There it was again. Chloe wants. "Why now?" I asked. "Just being proactive. he said. Something about his tone felt off. Not wrong exactly, just rehearsed. I can send you the number, I said slowly. But Ethan, have you reviewed your current policy carefully? Yeah, he said quickly. We just want to increase the coverage. You know, just in case. Just in case. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tightening slightly around the phone. Ethan, I said, choosing my words carefully. Make sure you understand exactly what you're signing. And don't let anyone rush you into changes that don't feel right. There was a pause on the other end, then a small sigh. Mom, it's fine. Chloe's already talked to someone. This is just a formality. A formality. All right, I said quietly. Just be careful. I will, he replied, but I could already hear it. That same distance, that same quiet dismissal. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at nothing. The insurance, the renovations, the contractor, the tension. Individually, they could all be explained, but together, they told a story. I just didn't know the ending yet, and what scared me the most was the feeling that whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be small. The night of the fire didn't begin with sirens. It began with silence. I remember because I was sitting in my living room, a book open in my lap, though I hadn't turned a page in nearly 20 minutes. It was one of those quiet evenings where everything feels suspended, no wind, no noise, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock that somehow sounds louder than usual. Then my phone rang. Late calls are never good news. I picked it up on the second ring. Hello. There was shouting on the other end, not just one voice, several, confused, overlapping, urgent, and then I heard Ethan. Mom, it's the house. There's a fire. For a moment, everything inside me went still. What do you mean a fire? I asked, already standing, my heart pounding hard enough to make my chest ache. Something happened. It spread so fast we're outside. Are you safe? I cut in. Yes, he said quickly. We're okay. Chloe's with me. We got out. I closed my eyes for a second, gripping the edge of the table. Stay where you are, I said. I'm coming. I didn't remember grabbing my keys. I didn't remember locking the door. The next thing I knew, I was in my car, driving faster than I should have, my hands tight on the steering wheel as the dark road stretched endlessly in front of me. By the time I turned onto their street, I could already see it. Orange, bright, violent, alive. The flames rose above the roofline like something breathing, something feeding. Fire trucks lined the curb, red lights flashing against the night. Neighbors stood in clusters, their faces lit by the glow, their voices low and urgent. I pulled over without thinking and stepped out. The heat hit me immediately. Even from the street, it was overwhelming. And there, near the edge of the lawn, stood Ethan and Chloe, wrapped in blankets, faces illuminated by firelight. Watching, I walked toward them, my legs unsteady. Ethan, I called. He turned, relief flooding his face. Mom! I reached him and pulled him into a tight embrace, my hands gripping his shoulders as if I needed to confirm he was real. You're okay, I whispered. You're okay. I'm fine, he said, though his voice trembled slightly. I pulled back and looked at Chloe. She stood just behind him, arms folded tightly across her chest, a blanket draped around her shoulders. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her face pale, but her eyes weren't panicked. They were focused, watching the house like someone studying something. Chloe, I said gently, are you all right? She nodded. We got out in time. Her voice was steady, too steady. I turned back toward the house. The flames had already consumed most of the front section. The windows were shattered, the roof beginning to sag. Firefighters moved with urgency, shouting instructions, hoses spraying arcs of water that seemed almost useless against something that large. "How did it start?" I asked. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "We don't know. It was just sudden. One minute, everything was normal. The next, there was smoke, and then flames," where I asked quickly. "In the kitchen area," he said. "Near the wall." The wall. My stomach dropped. I stared at the burning structure, my mind racing. "That doesn't make sense," I murmured. Ethan looked at me. "What? The way it's spreading?" I said, more to myself than to him. "It's too fast." Chloe's head snapped slightly in my direction. "Fires spread," she said flatly. "That's what they do." "Yes," I replied, still watching the flames. "But not like this." There was a brief silence. Then Chloe shifted her weight. "Well, we're not experts," she said. "We just got out before it got worse." I nodded slowly. "But it got worse." I nodded slowly, but something in my chest tightened further. Because as I stood there watching everything collapse, I started noticing things, small things, details. "Ethan," I said, turning to him again. "Where's the dining table?" The one you just bought, in my chest tightened further. Because as I stood there, watching everything collapse, I started noticing things, small things, details. "Ethan," I said, turning to him again. "Where's the dining table? The one you just bought?" He blinked. "What?" "The table?" I repeated. "It was right near the kitchen. I don't see it." He hesitated, just for a second. Then he shrugged. "Maybe it already burned." I looked back at the house. The fire had destroyed a lot, yes, but not everything. And the area where the table should have been, it looked empty. Before I could say anything else, one of the firefighters approached us. "Are you the homeowners?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "Yes. We've got it contained to the main structure, but it's a total loss," the firefighter said. "I'm sorry." Ethan swallowed hard and nodded again. Chloe stepped forward slightly. "Do you know what caused it?" The firefighter shook his head. "Too early to say. Could be electrical, could be something else. We'll have investigators look at it." "Investigators?" The word hung in the air for a moment. "Thank you," Chloe said quickly. The firefighter gave a brief nod and moved on. I turned back to the house, my eyes scanning the chaos. And then I noticed something else. The garage door. It was open. Inside, I could see the outline of the car. Untouched. "Your car," I said. "You didn't try to move it?" Ethan followed my gaze. "No, there wasn't time." Chloe added. "We barely made it out as it was." I nodded slowly. But inside, something didn't line up, because if the fire had started suddenly, if it had spread as fast as Ethan said, then how had they both made it out so cleanly? No burns, no injuries, no real panic in their movements. Just blankets, calm voices, standing at a safe distance, watching. I looked at Chloe again. She was still staring at the house, but not the way people usually do when they're losing everything. There was no desperation in her expression, no disbelief, just calculation, like she was already thinking about what came next. And that was the moment something shifted inside me. Not fear, not confusion, something sharper. Because standing there in the glow of those flames, I realized something I didn't want to believe. This didn't feel like something that had happened to them. It felt like something they had prepared for. And the worst part, no one else seemed to see it. The neighbors whispered about tragedy. The firefighters spoke about accidents. But I stood there watching my son's life burn to the ground. And all I could think was, this wasn't chaos. This was control. In the days after the fire, people kept using the same word, tragic. They said it with soft voices and sympathetic eyes, like that one word could wrap everything up neatly, like it explained the loss, the chaos, the shock. But the more I heard it, the less it felt right. Because tragedy is supposed to feel unpredictable, and this didn't. By the second morning, Chloe had already started making calls. Not to friends, not to family, to the insurance company. I was sitting at my kitchen table when Ethan called me, his voice heavy but oddly controlled. "They're sending someone out today to assess the damage," he said. "That was fast," I replied. There was a brief pause. "Chloe got everything started right away," he added. "Of course she did." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the steam rise. "Ethan," I said carefully, "have you had time to process what happened?" "Not really," he admitted. "It's just everything's moving so fast." "Yes," I said quietly. "That's exactly what concerns me." Another pause. Then that familiar shift in his tone, the one that told me he was about to defy on. That told me he was about to defy in something he didn't fully understand himself. "Mom, this is what insurance is for," he said. "We have to move forward." "I'm not saying you shouldn't," I replied. "I'm saying you should be careful." With what and something he didn't fully understand himself. "Mom, this is what insurance is for," he said. "We have to move forward." "I'm not saying you shouldn't," I replied. "I'm saying you should be careful. With how quickly decisions are being made," I said, "and who's making them." I didn't need to say Chloe's name. It was already there between us. Ethan exhaled softly. "She's just trying to handle things." "I know," I said, "but handling things and controlling things aren't always the same." It was already there between us. Ethan exhaled softly. "She's just trying to handle things." "I know," I said, "but handling things and controlling things aren't always the same." Silence. Then gently but firmly he said, "Mom, please don't start this right now." There it was again, that quiet line being drawn. "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I'm asking you to slow down." "We can't," he replied. "There are deadlines, paperwork, inspections. Then let me help," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "I think we've got it," he said finally. "Of course you do." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at my untouched coffee. Something about the pace of everything felt wrong. Not just fast, calculated. Later that afternoon, I drove back to the property. The fire had been put out, but the smell still lingered thick, bitter, clinging to the air like something that refused to leave. Yellow caution tape stretched across the front of the yard. The house, what was left of it, stood blackened and hollow, like a shell of something that had once been alive. Ethan was there, talking to a man in a dark jacket. Chloe stood a few feet away, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. As I approached, Ethan saw me and gave a small nod. "Mom," he said, "this is the insurance adjuster." The man turned and extended his hand. "David Harper, Trevor Langley," I replied, shaking it. His grip was firm, his expression professional, but distant. "We're just starting the initial assessment," he said, "trying to determine the extent of the loss." I nodded, then glanced at the house again. "Do you have any idea what caused it?" I asked. Too early to say, he replied. We'll need a full investigation before we can make any conclusions. Before I could respond, Chloe ended her call and stepped over. David, I just spoke with the claims department, she said quickly. They said we should document everything we lost as soon as possible. He nodded. That's correct. I've already started a list, she continued. Furniture, appliances, electronics, everything. Already. I looked at her. You've had time to do that? I asked. She gave me a tight smile. You'd be surprised what you can do when you're motivated. Motivated. Not grieving. Not overwhelmed. Motivated. Ethan shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable. Chloe's just trying to stay organized, he said. I can see that, I replied. David cleared his throat. Oh, organization helps speed up the process. Ethan shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable. Chloe's just trying to stay organized, he said. I can see that, I replied. David cleared his throat. Organization helps speed up the process. Exactly, Chloe said, her tone sharpening slightly as she glanced at me. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked a few steps closer to the caution tape and looked at the remains of the kitchen area. The wall where the panel had been. It was gone, collapsed inward, reduced to charred debris. But even in that state, something stood out. The burn pattern. It didn't look like what I expected. The damage was concentrated intense in certain areas, lighter in others. Uneven, like the fire hadn't spread naturally. Do you mind if I ask something? I said, turning back to David. Of course. Have you seen many electrical fires? I asked. He nodded. A fair number? Do they usually burn like that? I asked, gesturing toward the house. He followed my gaze, studying the structure for a moment. It depends on the circumstances, he said carefully. There are a lot of variables. That's not an answer, Chloe cut in. David remained calm. It's the only honest one at this stage. I watched him closely. He wasn't dismissing the question, but he wasn't answering it either. Will there be a separate investigation, I asked? Yes, he said. A fire investigator will be assigned. They'll determine the cause. Chloe crossed her arms. How long will that take? A few days, possibly longer, he replied. Her jaw tightened slightly. I was told this could move quickly, she said. It can, he replied, but only after we establish what actually happened. There was something in his tone now, subtle, but firm. And for the first time since I arrived, I saw a flicker of something in Chloe's expression. Not fear, not exactly, but irritation. Like things weren't moving the way she expected them to. I turned back to Ethan. Have you spoken to anyone about where you'll stay? I asked. We're at a hotel for now, he said. Insurance is covering it. Of course they are. Everything already lined up. Everything already in motion. Mom, he added, lowering his voice slightly, please don't make this harder than it already is. I looked at him, really looked, at the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, and beneath all of that, something else, something unsettled. I'm not trying to make it harder, I said gently. I'm trying to understand it. Chloe let out a quiet, frustrated breath. Not everything has a hidden meaning. Trevor, she said, sometimes bad things just happen. I met her gaze. Sometimes they do, I said, but sometimes they don't. The air between us tightened. David glanced between the three of us, clearly sensing the tension. Well, he said, checking his notes. We'll continue the assessment and keep you updated. Chloe nodded quickly. Thank you. As he walked away, I stayed where I was, my eyes returning to the burned structure one more time. And the more I looked at it, the more certain I became. This wasn't just a fire. It was a story. one that had already been written. I just hadn't seen the whole script yet. The investigator arrived 2 days later. Not the insurance adjuster. That had already happened. This was different, more deliberate, more final. His name was Mark Sullivan. He didn't come with urgency or noise, no flashing lights, no sense of drama, just a dark sedan that pulled up quietly to the curb, and a man who stepped out with the kind of calm presence that made people lower their voices without realizing it. I noticed him before anyone else did. He walked toward the property slowly, his eyes scanning everything, the house, the ground, the caution tape, even the neighbors' yards, as if every detail mattered. Because to him, it probably did. I was already there when he arrived. I had started coming by each morning, telling myself I was just checking on things. But the truth was, I couldn't stay away. Something about that place was still speaking to me, and I needed to understand what it was saying. Ethan and Chloe pulled up about 10 minutes later. Chloe spotted Mark almost immediately. "Is that him?" she asked, her voice low but tense. Ethan nodded. "I think so." They both stepped out of the car, and Chloe adjusted her jacket like she was preparing for something. Not grief, not loss, something more controlled. Prepared. Mark introduced himself simply. "Mark Sullivan. I'm here on behalf of the insurance company to investigate the cause of the fire." His voice was steady, neutral, professional. Chloe gave him a quick smile. "We've been expecting you." "I'm sure," he replied. There was something subtle in the way he said it, not rude, not suspicious, but not trusting either. He shook Ethan's hand, then glanced briefly at me. "And you are?" he asked. "Trevor Langley," I said. "Ethan's mother." He gave a small nod, his eyes holding mine for just a second longer than necessary. It wasn't obvious, but it was enough. Enough to tell me he was noticing things too. "All right," he said, turning back to the house. "I'll need to walk through the site first. Then I'll have some questions." Chloe stepped forward quickly. "Of course, whatever you need." He didn't respond to her directly. Instead, he ducked under the caution tape and stepped into what remained of the structure. For the next 20 minutes, no one spoke. We stood outside, watching him move through the wreckage with slow, methodical precision. He didn't rush, didn't react. He simply observed. At one point, he crouched near the area where the kitchen had been. He stayed there longer than anywhere else, his hand brushing lightly over the charred debris. His head tilted slightly, as if he was listening to something only he could hear. I felt it again, that tightening in my chest. Because that was exactly where I had stood weeks earlier. Exactly where I had said, "This isn't right." When Mark finally came back out, his expression hadn't changed. But his eyes had. There was focus there now. Sharp, intent. "Let's talk," he said. We gathered near the sidewalk. He pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open. "Start from the beginning," he said. "The night of the fire." Ethan spoke first. "We were in the living room," he said. "Everything was normal. Then we smelled smoke." From where Mark interrupted. "The kitchen," Ethan replied. Mark nodded slightly. "What time?" "Around 10:30, I think." You think Mark repeated, his tone still calm. Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, around that." Mark wrote something down. "And what did you do next?" "We checked the kitchen, saw flames starting near the wall, and then it just spread." Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, around that." Mark wrote something down. "And what did you do next?" "We checked the kitchen, saw flames starting near the wall, and then it just spread," Ethan said. "Fast." "How fast?" Mark asked. "Really fast," Chloe cut in. Within minutes, it was out of control. Mark looked at her for the first time. Not dismissively, not confrontationally, just directly. Minutes, he repeated. Yes, she said firmly. We barely had time to get out. Mark made another note. Did you attempt to put it out? He asked. No, Ethan said quickly. It was already too big. Mark nodded again. And what did you take with you when you left? The question hung in the air. Ethan blinked. What do you mean? Personal items? Mark clarified. Phones, wallets, anything else? Just essentials, Chloe said. We didn't have time for anything else. I watched Mark carefully. He didn't react, but I saw it. That slight pause in his pen. All right, he said. And prior to the fire, any issues with the electrical system, appliances, anything unusual? Ethan shook his head. No, Chloe added. Everything was recently upgraded. Mark glanced up. Upgraded? Yes, she said. We had some electrical work done. New installations, improvements. Who did the work, he asked. Jason Cole, Ethan replied. Mark wrote the name down. Licensed contractor, he asked. Yes, Chloe said quickly. Mark looked at her again. Do you have documentation for that? Of course, she said. I can send it over. Please do, he replied. There was a brief silence. Then before I could stop myself, I spoke. I had concerns about that work. Both Ethan and Chloe turned toward me immediately. Mom, Ethan started, but Mark raised a hand slightly. Go on, he said. I met his gaze. 3 weeks ago, I noticed the wiring layout didn't match standard installation patterns, I said. The panel near the kitchen was off. It looked like something had been rerouted improperly. Chloe let out a sharp breath. We've already been through this. I'm speaking to the investigator, I said calmly. Mark didn't look at Chloe. He was watching me. Improper, Howie asked. The positioning didn't align with typical load distribution, I said, and the patchwork suggested it had been altered after initial installation. He nodded slowly. And you mentioned this at the time. Yes. And what was the response? I glanced at Ethan, then back at Mark. It was dismissed. Silence settled over us. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Mark wrote something down again. Then he closed his notebook. I'll be conducting a full analysis of the site, he said, including burn patterns, material residues, and structural damage. Chloe crossed her arms. How long will that take? As long as it needs to, he replied. Her jaw tightened slightly. And the insurance claim, she asked. That process will depend on my findings, he said. Not should, not might, will. I saw it then. That flicker again in Chloe's expression. Not control this time. Not confidence. Something closer to frustration. Maybe even concern. Mark turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, he said, looking at Ethan. Yes, try to recall exact times, he said. Details matter more than people think. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay. Mark gave a final glance at the house, then walked back to his car. As he drove away, the silence between us lingered. Chloe was the first to break it. This is ridiculous, she muttered. He's treating this like a crime scene? I didn't respond, because that was exactly what it felt like. Ethan rubbed his face. He's just doing his job. Yeah, she said sharply. Well, his job is going to delay everything. I didn't respond, because that was exactly what it felt like. Ethan rubbed his face. He's just doing his job. Yeah, she said sharply. Well, his job. Yeah, she said sharply. Well, his job is going to delay everything. Everything. Not answers, not truth. Everything. I looked back at the house one more time. Then I said quietly, more to myself, to Han, anyone else? Maybe it should. job is going to delay everything. Everything. Not answers, not truth. Everything. I looked back at the house one more time. Then I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else, maybe it should. Because for the first time since the fire started, someone else was asking the same questions I was. And something told me he wasn't going to stop until he got the answers. The deeper Mark Sullivan looked into the fire, the more everything around it started to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, like a surface cracking under pressure. And the first crack didn't come from the house. It came from the numbers. I didn't expect to be the one to find it. In fact, if you had asked me a week earlier, I would have told you that Ethan's finances were none of my business, that he was a grown man capable of managing his own life. But something about all of this had changed that. Because when things stop making sense, you start looking for patterns. And patterns, more often than not, live in the details people don't think anyone will notice. It started with a simple conversation. Ethan came by my house late one afternoon unannounced. That alone told me something was wrong. He stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. You don't have to knock like that, I said gently. You're still my son. He gave a small, tired smile. Yeah, I know. I made him a cup of coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table he used to sit at every Sunday when life felt simpler. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then finally, he sighed. It's a lot, he said. I know, I replied. He ran a hand through his hair. The house, the insurance, the investigation, Chloe's trying to keep everything moving. But it's just overwhelming, I suggested. Yeah, he said quietly. I studied him for a moment. There was something different about him now. Not just stress, something heavier, like the weight of something he didn't want to admit, even to himself. Ethan, I said carefully, how are things, really? He looked at me, then looked away. Fine, he said automatically. I didn't respond. I just waited. It took a few seconds. Then he exhaled again, longer this time. Not great, he admitted. There it was. The truth always starts small. What's not great? I asked gently. He hesitated. Then slowly, like he was pulling the words out of himself, one by one, he said, We've been stretched. Financially, I asked. He nodded. How stretched? Another pause. More than I should have let it get. I felt something tighten in my chest. Ethan, I thought it was temporary, he said quickly. You know, investments upgrades. Chloe said it would all pay off. That increasing the property value would put us ahead. I felt something tighten in my chest. Ethan, I thought it was temporary, he said quickly. You know, investments upgrades. Chloe said it would all pay off. That increasing said it would all pay off. That increasing the property value would put us ahead. And did it? I asked. He gave a hollow laugh. No. The room went quiet. Do you know how much you owe? I asked. He nodded slowly. Between the loans, the credit lines, the renovations, the property value would put us ahead. And did it? I asked. He gave a hollow laugh. No. The room went quiet. Do you know how much you owe? I asked. He nodded slowly. Between the loans, the credit lines, the renovations. He swallowed. It's a lot. How much? I pressed gently. He looked at me. Then he said the number. And for a moment, I couldn't speak. Because it wasn't just a lot. It was the kind of number that doesn't come from bad luck. It comes from decisions, repeated ones. Ethan, I said, softly. Why didn't you tell me? He shrugged his eyes, fixed on the table. Because I thought I could fix it, he said. Because Chloe kept saying we were close to turning things around, that we just needed one more push. One more push, I repeated. He nodded, and suddenly everything started to connect. The renovations, the loans, the urgency, the insurance. When did you update the insurance policy, I asked? He frowned slightly. A few weeks before the fire. How much did you increase it by? He told me. And that was when the second crack formed. Because the increase wasn't small. It wasn't precautionary. It was significant. Enough to cover not just the house, but the debt. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Ethan, I said slowly, whose idea was that? He didn't answer right away. He didn't have to. I thought it made sense, he said, finally. With everything we'd invested into the house, Chloe said we needed to protect it. Protect it. Or prepare it. And the contractor, I said. Jason Cole, who found him. Chloe, he replied. Of course she did. I folded my hands in front of me, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you ever meet him before the work started? Ethan shook his head. No. Chloe handled that. And the payments? She handled those too. Every answer pointed in the same direction. Not subtle anymore. Not uncertain. Clear. Too clear. Ethan shook his head. No. Chloe handled that. And the payments, she handled those too. Every answer pointed in the same direction. Not subtle anymore. Not uncertain. Clear. Too clear. Ethan, I said quietly, I need you to think very carefully about something. He looked at me, his expression tense. Do you trust Chloe? The question landed harder than I expected. His eyes widened slightly. What kind of question is that, he asked. A serious one, I said. Of course I trust her, he replied, but there was something in his voice now, something less certain. Then why are you here? I asked softly. That stopped him. Completely. Because he didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to say it out loud. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. I don't know, he admitted. It was barely above a whisper. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't already telling me what to think. There it was again. That control, that influence, and for the first time I saw it clearly. Not as tension, not as personality, but as pressure. Constant, subtle, relentless. Ethan, I said gently, has Chloe been pushing you to do things you weren't comfortable with? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. A little, I repeated. He gave a weak smile. Okay, more than a little. I felt a deep, steady sadness settle in my chest. Because this wasn't just about money or a house. This was about my son losing his footing, slowly, without even realizing it. And the night of the fire, I said carefully, Did anything feel off to you? He froze, just for a second, but it was enough. What do you mean, he asked. I held his gaze. I mean exactly what I said. Another pause, longer this time. Then he looked away. It all happened so fast, he said. I didn't really think about it. But his voice didn't match his words. And I knew it. He knew it too. The truth was there, right beneath the surface, and it was only a matter of time before it came out. Because now, it wasn't just me asking questions. Mark Sullivan was asking them too, and something told me he was getting closer to the kind of answers that don't just explain what happened, but why. The next crack didn't come from Ethan. It came from Chloe. And it happened the moment she realized something was no longer under her control. It was early afternoon when she showed up at my house. No call, no warning. Just a sharp knock on the door, 3 quick hits, impatient, deliberate. I knew it was her before I even opened it. When I did, she stood there in a fitted blazer, her posture rigid, her expression carefully composed, but her eyes weren't calm anymore. They were searching. "Trevor," she said, forcing a polite smile. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. Of course. She walked in without hesitation, scanning the room like she was checking for something or someone. "Is Ethan here?" she asked. "No," I said. "He left about an hour ago." She nodded once, like that confirmed something for her. "Good," she said. That single word sent a quiet chill through me. I gestured toward the kitchen. "Would you like some coffee?" "No," she replied quickly. "I won't be long." We sat across from each other at the table, the same table where Ethan had sat just the day before, finally admitting the truth about their finances. The same table where I had started to understand just how deep this situation went. Chloe placed her hands neatly in front of her fingers, interlocked. Composed. Controlled. But I could see it. The tension in her shoulders. The tightness around her mouth. She was here for a reason, and it wasn't a friendly visit. "I'm going to be direct," she said. "I would expect nothing less," I replied. Her smile flickered, then disappeared. "You spoke to the investigator," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said calmly. "And you told him you had concerns about the electrical work." "I told him what I observed," I corrected. Her jaw tightened slightly. "You made it sound like there was something wrong," she said. "I said something didn't make sense," I replied. "There's a difference." She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "Trevor, this is already a difficult situation. We don't need speculation making things worse." Speculation. I held her gaze. "Truth isn't speculation," I said. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "And what exactly do you think the truth is?" she asked. There it was. The challenge. The test. She wanted to know how much I knew, or how close I was. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I said, "I think you moved very quickly after the fire." Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. "That's called being responsible," she said. "Or being prepared," I replied. The words hung in the air, heavy, sharp. Her fingers tightened slightly against each other. "Are you accusing me of something?" she asked. "I'm asking questions," I said. "No," she said, her voice firmer now. "You're implying something, and I'd like to know what that is." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't feel in control of this conversation. "You increased the insurance policy significantly just weeks before the fire," I said. "That's called protecting our investment. You hired a contractor Ethan had never met," I continued. "That's called delegation. You handled all the payments I added. That's called efficiency." Every answer was ready, polished, practiced. But too perfect. And perfection, I've learned, often hides something. "Chloe," I said quietly, "why does everything feel like it was set up?" That did it. The mask cracked. Just for a second. Her eyes flashed not with fear, but with anger. "Because you wanted to," she snapped. "Because you've never trusted me." "That's not true," I said. "Really?" She shot back. Because every time something doesn't fit your version of how things should be, you start digging. You start questioning. You start seeing patterns. I interrupted. She stopped. Her breathing was slightly uneven now. This isn't about patterns, she said. This is about you not respecting our life. Our life? I repeated softly. Yes, she said. Ethan and I built something together, and now it's gone. And instead of supporting us, you're standing here trying to turn it into something it's not. I let her words settle. Then I asked the one question she wasn't expecting. Why were certain things missing? She froze. Completely. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. What do you mean? She asked carefully. The dining table, I said. Some of the electronics. Items that should have been there, but weren't. Her expression shifted again, this time faster, more defensive. Things get destroyed in fires, she said, or moved, or stolen afterward. That's not unusual. No, I said, but patterns are. Silence. Thick. Heavy. She stood up suddenly, pushing her chair back just a little too hard. I don't have time for this, she said. No, I replied quietly. I don't think you do. She stared at me for a moment, and this time she didn't try to hide it. The anger, the frustration, the loss of control. You're making a mistake, she said. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe I already made one, by not asking these questions sooner. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she turned and walked toward the door. But just before she reached it, she stopped. And without turning around, she said, You don't understand what it's like to have everything on the line. I stood slowly. No, I said. I understand exactly what that feels like. She didn't respond. She just opened the door and left. The house fell quiet again, but something had changed. Because that conversation, it wasn't about convincing me of anything. It was about control. And for the first time, she didn't have it. I walked back to the kitchen table and sat down, my mind replaying every word, every reaction, every hesitation. And one thing became very clear. Chloe wasn't afraid of losing the house. She wasn't afraid of the investigation. She wasn't even afraid of me. She was afraid of something else, something bigger, something that hadn't come out yet. And whatever it was close, closer than ever. Because now it wasn't just suspicion. It was pressure, building. And sooner or later, something was going to break. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. And the next piece came from somewhere Chloe never expected. The contractor, Jason Cole. I didn't go looking for him at first. In fact, if Mark Sullivan hadn't mentioned his name again during a follow-up conversation, I might have let it sit there, just another detail buried under everything else. But Mark didn't forget details, and now neither did I. He's not returning calls, Mark told me over the phone. We were speaking privately away from Ethan and Chloe. Not unusual, I said. Contractors disappear all the time. Not when there's an open investigation tied to their work, he replied. There was a pause, then he added, and not when the work they did is questionable. Not unusual, I said. Contractors disappear all the time. Not when there's an open investigation tied to their work, he replied. There was a pause. Then he added, and not when the work they did is questionable. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. What have you found? I asked. Enough to keep digging, he said. Not enough to make a conclusion. That was Mark's way. Careful, measured. But the implication was clear. Something wasn't right. Do you have an address for him? I asked. Another pause. You planning to pay him a visit? He asked. Just gathering information, I said. He exhaled softly like he knew exactly what I was doing. I'll send it. Do you have an address for him? I asked. Another pause. You planning to pay him a visit? He asked. Just gathering information? I said. He exhaled softly like he knew exactly what I was doing. I'll send it, he said. But Trevor, be careful. I always am, I replied, but we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Because when it comes to your child, careful doesn't always mean cautious. Sometimes it just means you're willing to walk into things you shouldn't. The address led me to a small, worn-down house on the edge of town. Not the kind of place you'd expect from someone handling major electrical renovations. The yard was unkempt, the paint peeling. A rusted truck sat in the driveway. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. Just as I was about to turn away, I heard movement inside. Then the door opened halfway. A man in his early 40s stood there, his expression guarded. Yeah, he said. Jason Cole? I asked. Who's asking? Trevor Langley, I replied. You did some electrical work for my son Ethan. His eyes flickered. Recognition. Then something else. Something like hesitation. Yeah, he said slowly. What about it? I'd like to ask you a few questions. He looked past me, scanning the street, then back at me. I don't have anything to say, he muttered, starting to close the door. About the fire, I said quickly. That stopped him. The door paused mid-motion. What fire? He asked. I held his gaze. The one at Ethan's house? Silence. Then he opened the door just a little wider. I heard about that, he said. That's not on me. I didn't say it was, I replied. Another pause. Then reluctantly, he stepped aside. 5 minutes, he said. That's it. I walked in. The inside of the house matched the outside. Simple, cluttered, lived in. He gestured toward a chair. I sat. He remained standing. What do you want to know? He asked. Start with the work you did, I said. He shrugged. Standard upgrades. Wiring, panel adjustments, nothing unusual. That's not what I saw, I said. His eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean, the layout didn't match standard configurations? I replied. It looked altered. He hesitated. Just for a second. Then he scoffed. Look, lady, every house is different. You can't expect everything to look textbook. I can expect it to be safe, I said. That landed. His jaw tightened. It was safe, he said firmly. Are you licensed? I asked. Another pause. Yeah, he said. Can I see it? He didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there, and that was all I needed. You're not, I said quietly. He looked away. Chloe didn't ask, he muttered. There it was, the name. So she hired you without verifying your credentials, I asked. He shrugged again. She said she didn't care about paperwork, just wanted it done fast. Fast. Everything kept coming back to that. How did she find you? I asked. He hesitated again, then said, She didn't. My heart skipped. What do you mean? She didn't find me, he said. I was referred. By who? He looked at me, and for a moment I saw it. That flicker of doubt, like he was deciding whether to say something he shouldn't. I don't remember, he said finally. Lie. Clear as day. Jason, I said calmly. There's an investigation underway. If your work is connected to what happened. It's not, he snapped. His reaction was immediate. Too immediate. I didn't start that fire, he said. I just did what I was told. The words hung in the air, heavy, uncontrolled, and there it was, the first real break. What were you told? I asked quietly. He froze, completely. Then he shook his head. I shouldn't have said that. No, I said. You shouldn't have. Silence filled the room. Thick, pressing. Jason, I said gently. Did Chloe ask you to change something in that wiring? He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. Did she ask? He didn't deny it either. Did she ask you to make it unstable? I continued. His eyes snapped to mine. No, he said quickly. Not like that. Not like that. Then how I pressed. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. She just you to make it unstable? I continued. His eyes snapped to mine. No, he said quickly. Not like that. Not like that. Then how I pressed. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. She wanted it set up a certain way, he said. Said it would help with future modifications. What kind of modifications? I asked. He shook his head. I don't know. I didn't ask. But you knew it wasn't standard, I said. He looked at me again. This time, there was no deflection, no attitude, just discomfort. Yeah, he admitted. Then why did you do it? He let out a hollow laugh. Because she paid in cash, he said. Up front. No questions. Cash. No records. No trace. I leaned back slowly, my mind connecting the pieces faster now. The insurance increase, the rushed renovations, the missing items, the controlled narrative, and now the wiring. You need to tell the investigator this, I said. His eyes widened. No way, he said immediately. I'm not getting dragged into this. You already are, I replied. He shook his head. No, I'm not. I didn't light anything. I just did a job. A job that may have made that fire possible, I said. He went quiet, and in that silence, the truth settled between us. He didn't need to say it. We both knew. When I left his house, the air felt different, heavier. Because now this wasn't just suspicion. It wasn't just patterns. It was proof. Not complete, not official, but real. And as I drove away, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Chloe didn't just react to the fire. She built the conditions for it. And if that was true, then everything that came next was never an accident. I didn't go home after speaking with Jason. I drove straight to Mark. Some truths are too heavy to sit on. And if I had learned anything over the past week, it was this delay only helps the person hiding something. Mark was at his office when I arrived, though office felt like too formal a word for it. It was a modest building, practical, with none of the polished shine Chloe seemed to trust so easily. He looked up when I walked in, and from the way his expression shifted, I knew he saw it on my face. Something had changed. Trevor, he said, standing. You look like you found something. I did, I replied. He gestured for me to sit. Tell me. And so I did. Everything. Jason's hesitation, his lack of a license, the cash payments, the altered wiring, and most importantly, I just did what I was told. Mark didn't interrupt once. He didn't react visibly either. But I could see it in his eyes. The pieces were locking into place. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair. "That explains the burn pattern," he said. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" He reached for a file on his desk and opened it, turning it toward me. Photographs, close-ups of the damage, charred beams, melted wiring, blackened walls. But what caught my attention wasn't the destruction. It was the pattern. The fire hadn't spread randomly. It had concentrated, focused, almost like it had been guided. "Electrical fires don't usually behave like this," Mark said. "Not without a specific trigger." "And the wiring?" I asked. He nodded. "If it was modified the way you're describing it could have created a vulnerability," he said. "Something that wouldn't fail immediately. Something that would hold until the right conditions." The right conditions. The words settled heavily between us. "So, it wasn't an accident," I said. He held my gaze. I didn't say that he replied carefully. "But it wasn't random either." "No, it wasn't." I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the rising weight in my chest. "Mark," I said quietly, "if someone wanted this to happen, would it look like this?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed the file and folded his hands. "Intent is difficult to prove," he said, "but preparation leaves traces. Traces, like cash payments, unlicensed work, insurance increases, missing items. Every step Chloe had taken had left something behind." "Have you spoken to Ethan about any of this?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because I wasn't ready to break my son's world. Because once he saw it, he wouldn't be able to unsee it. Because I need to be sure," I said. Mark nodded. "That's fair." He stood and walked over to a board on the wall. There were notes pinned there. Dates, times, observations, a timeline. And now he began adding to it. "Insurance policy increased 3 weeks prior," he said, writing it down. "Electrical modifications, same time frame. Contractor unlicensed, paid in cash." He paused, then added one more line. "Items removed prior to fire." He stepped back and studied the board. Then he said something that made my stomach turn. "This wasn't impulsive." No, it wasn't. It was planned, layer by layer, step by step. "Mark," I said, my voice lower now. "If this was intentional, what does that mean for the claim?" He looked at me. "It means everything stops," he said. "No payout, full investigation, possibly criminal charges." Criminal. The word echoed in my mind, because suddenly, this wasn't just about money or insurance. This was about consequences, real ones. "And Chloe?" I asked. His expression didn't change. "If she's involved," he said, "then she's the one with the most to lose." I nodded slowly, because that made sense. Too much sense. Everything she had done had pointed toward one goal: control the outcome, control the narrative, control the money. But she hadn't accounted for one thing: the truth. And now, it was catching up to her. "Mark," I said, "what happens next? Control the outcome, control the narrative, control the money." But she hadn't accounted for one thing: the truth. And now it was catching up to her. "Mark," I said, "what happens next?" He looked at the board again, then back at me. "I need a statement from Jason," he said. "He won't give one," I replied. "He will," Mark said calmly. "One way or another." There was something in his tone now. Not aggressive, but certain. Like this wasn't his first time unraveling something like this. "And Ethan?" I asked. Mark paused, then said, "He needs to hear it." My chest tightened. I know, I said. But that doesn't make it easier. No, he agreed. It doesn't. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then he added, but the longer he doesn't know, the harder it's going to be. I knew he was right. Of course he was right. But knowing something and being ready for it are two very different things. When I left his office, the world felt heavier. Not chaotic, not uncertain, just clearer. Too clear. Because now there was no room for doubt, no room for denial. Chloe hadn't just been controlling things after the fire. She had been controlling things before it. And everything that followed, the insurance, the urgency, the narrative, it was all part of something bigger, something deliberate. As I sat in my car, my hands resting on the steering wheel, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Ethan, my son, the boy I raised, the man who trusted too easily, who believed in people, even when they didn't deserve it. And now, he was standing at the center of something he didn't even see, something that could destroy everything, not just his house, but his life. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I made a decision. I couldn't protect him from the truth. Not anymore. Because the truth was already here. And if I didn't show him, someone else would. And they wouldn't do it gently. Telling the truth is one thing. Watching someone you love hear it is something else entirely. I asked Ethan to meet me the next morning. Not at my house, not at his. Neutral ground. A small diner, just outside town, the kind of place where conversations blend into the background, where no one listens too closely, where people mind their own business. He arrived 10 minutes late. That alone told me something. Ethan had never been late, not like this. When he walked in, I barely recognized the look on his face. Not just tired, not just stressed, unsettled. Like something inside him had already started shifting, even before I said a word. Hey, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. Hey, I replied softly. We ordered coffee. Neither of us touched it. For a moment, we sat there in silence. Then he spoke first. You said it was important, he said. It is, I replied. He nodded slowly, bracing himself. What's going on? I looked at him. Really looked. At the man he had become. At the boy I had raised. And I realized something in that moment. There was no gentle way to do this. So I chose honesty. I spoke to the investigator yesterday, I said. His expression tightened slightly. Okay, and I also spoke to the contractor Chloe hired, I continued. That got his attention. His eyes sharpened. Why? Because something didn't feel right, I said. He leaned back slightly, his jaw tensing. Mom, Ethan, I interrupted gently. Please, just listen. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay. I took a slow breath. The contractor isn't licensed, I said. Ethan blinked. What? He doesn't have credentials, I repeated, and Chloe paid him in cash. That doesn't make sense, he said quickly. She told me I know what she told you, I said. He shook his head. No, she said She said a lot of things, I replied quietly. Silence. I could see it now, the beginning of it, that small fracture in his certainty. Ethan. I continued. The wiring in the house wasn't just poorly done. I paused, then said it. It was altered. He stared at me. What does that mean? It means it wasn't standard, I said. It means it created a risk. A risk, he repeated. Yes. His voice rose slightly. Are you saying the fire? I'm saying it wasn't random, I said firmly. That stopped him. Completely. The noise of the diner faded into the background. Everything narrowed to that moment. That's not possible, he said quietly. But his voice didn't believe it. It is, I said. He shook his head again, more forcefully this time. No, that doesn't make sense. Why would anyone? He stopped, mid-sentence, because the question answered itself. Why would anyone? Unless they had something to gain. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw fear. Real fear. Ethan, I said gently, when did you increase the insurance policy? He swallowed. A few weeks before the fire. And whose idea was that? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Ethan. I continued, my voice steady but soft. The contractor said something. His gaze snapped back to mine. What? I hesitated. Because this was the point of no return. Once I said it, everything would change. He said he just did what he was told. The words landed hard. Ethan froze. Then slowly he leaned back in his seat, staring at nothing. No, he said under his breath. No, that's not. He said he just did what he was told. The words landed hard. Ethan froze. Then slowly he leaned back in his seat, staring at nothing. No, he said under his breath. No, that's not. I wish it wasn't, I said, quietly. He ran both hands over his face, pressing his palms against his eyes like he could block it out. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Chloe wouldn't, Ethan, I said softly. Look at everything. The insurance, the renovations, the missing items, the urgency after the fire. It all points in the same direction. He shook his head again, but this time it wasn't denial. It was resistance, like he was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. You don't understand, he said, his voice strained. She's been under pressure. We both have. Things got out of control, but that doesn't mean she would set something up. I finished gently. He didn't respond, because now the thought was there, fully formed, and he couldn't push it away anymore. The silence stretched between us. Heavy, painful. Then after what felt like forever, he whispered, What if you're wrong? I leaned forward slightly. Then I'll be the first one to admit it. I said, But what if I'm not? His eyes filled slightly, though no tears fell. Because this wasn't just about truth. This was about betrayal. The kind that doesn't just hurt, it rewrites everything. I need to talk to her, he said finally. I nodded. I know, but not like this, he added quickly. Not accusations, not then don't accuse, I said. Ask. He looked at me. Ask what? The questions she doesn't expect, I replied. He let out a slow breath. And if she lies, I held his gaze. Then you'll know. Another long silence. Then he nodded. Slowly, reluctantly, but firmly. Okay, he said. He stood up, leaving his coffee untouched. I'll talk to her tonight. As he turned to leave, I felt something shift inside me. Because this was the moment everything changed. Not when the fire started, not when the investigation began, but now. Now that Ethan knew. Now that he had seen the cracks. Because once you see something like that, You can't unsee it. And as I watched him walk out of that diner, one thought stayed with me. Truth doesn't destroy things. It reveals what was already broken. And tonight, Ethan was going to find out just how broken things really were. That night changed everything. Not because of what was said, but because of what couldn't be unsaid. Ethan didn't call me right away. I didn't expect him to. Some conversations don't end when people stop talking. They echo. They linger. They break things open slowly. It was close to midnight when my phone finally rang. I knew it was him before I answered. "Ethan," I said softly. There was silence on the other end. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. The kind that carries something inside it. "Mom," he said finally. His voice was different, lower, rougher, like something inside him had been dragged across something sharp. "I'm here," I said. Another pause. Then, "You were right." The words came out flat, not emotional, not angry, just final. I closed my eyes for a moment, not in relief, not in satisfaction, but in sorrow. Because no parent ever wants to be right about something like this. "What happened?" I asked gently. There was a long exhale on the other end. "I asked her," he said. "Just like you told me." How I asked. Simple questions. Because no parent ever wants to be right about something like this. "What happened?" I asked gently. There was a long exhale on the other end. "I asked her," he said. "Just like you told me." How I asked. Simple questions, he replied. About the contractor, the wiring, the insurance. And at first, she did what she always does, he said. Answered everything perfectly, calm, logical. Like I was the one being unreasonable. I could picture it, the composure, the control. But then he continued, his voice tightening slightly. I asked her why some of our things were already gone before the fire. My chest tightened. And what did she say? She said I was imagining things, he replied. That I was stressed, that I didn't remember correctly. Gaslighting. Slow, subtle, effective. Did you believe her? I asked. No, he said immediately, and that told me everything. Why not? I asked softly. There was a pause. Then he said, because I remembered. I leaned forward slightly, gripping the phone a little tighter. Remembered what, the night before the fire, he said. His voice dropped lower, more distant, like he was replaying it in his mind as he spoke. I came home late. I leaned forward slightly, gripping the phone a little tighter. Remembered what, the night before the fire, he said. His voice dropped lower, more distant, like he was replaying it in his mind as he spoke. I came home late, he said. You know, from work. Chloe was already there. She said she'd been organizing some things, getting rid of clutter. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. I didn't think much of it at the time, he continued. But now? His voice trailed off. But now, I prompted gently. Now I remember boxes, he said. My heart sank. Boxes, I repeated. Yeah, he said. In the garage. Packed. Sealed. I asked her what they were, and she said donations. And you believed her, I said, quietly. I didn't have a reason not to, he replied. Of course he didn't. That's how trust works. Until it doesn't. What happened tonight? I asked. There was a long pause. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. I checked the storage unit. I straightened. You what? She has one, he said. I didn't even know about it, but I found the paperwork. And I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's full, he said. The words hit hard. What's in it, Ethan? Another pause. Then, everything. My chest tightened. The dining table, he said. The electronics. Some of the furniture. Even some of the things we said were lost in the fire. He let out a shaky breath. It's all there, Mom. The room around me felt suddenly too still. Too quiet. Because this wasn't suspicion anymore. This was proof. And Chloe? I asked. I confronted her, he said. How did she react? There was a bitter laugh on the other end. At first, she denied it. He said. Said I didn't understand. Said there was an explanation. And then I showed her the storage unit, he said. Silence. Then she stopped denying it. My grip tightened on the phone. What did she say? Another long pause. Then Ethan's voice came back quieter now. She said it was necessary. Necessary. The word echoed like something hollow. Necessary for what? I asked. For us, he said bitterly. For our future. For getting out of debt. My eyes closed again. Because there it was. Not just the action, but the justification. And the fire, I asked carefully. He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was almost unrecognizable. She didn't say it directly, he said. But she didn't deny it either. The silence that followed was unbearable. Because sometimes, what someone doesn't say is louder than anything else. I asked her if she knew it would happen, he continued. And she said she didn't think it would be that bad, he replied. That bad, as if there were acceptable levels of destruction. As if risk was something you could measure when other people were involved. As if she was just testing something, he added, his voice cracking slightly. My heart broke in that moment. Not for the house, not for the money, but for my son. Because the woman he trusted had turned his life into a calculation. Ethan, I said softly. I told her to leave, he said suddenly. I froze. What I told her to pack her things and get out, he repeated. There was no hesitation now. No doubt. Just clarity. She tried to argue, he said. Tried to explain. Tried to make it sound like it was all for us. And you? I asked. I told her there is no us in something like this, he said. The words were firm, steady, final. And then she left. Silence filled the line again. But this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating, just quiet. Like something had ended, and something else was beginning. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. The words caught me off guard. For what I asked gently. For not listening to you, he said. For dismissing you. For all of it. My throat tightened. Ethan, I said softly, this isn't about being right. I know, he said. It's about seeing the truth for what I asked gently. For not listening to you, he said. For dismissing you. For all of it. My throat tightened. Ethan, I said softly, this isn't about being right. I know, he said. It's about seeing the truth. I continued. And you did. There was a long pause. Then he said, I don't know what happens next. I exhaled slowly. Neither do I admitted. But we'll figure it out. Together. Because that's what family is supposed to do. And for the first time since this all began, It felt like we were finally on the same side. Justice doesn't arrive with a loud announcement. It comes quietly, methodically, and when it finally does, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like something heavy being set down. A few days after Ethan told me everything Mark called, his voice was the same as always, calm, steady, measured. But this time, there was something behind it. Finality. "I need both of you to come in," he said. "Ethan too?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "It's time." Those two words stayed with me long after the call ended. It's time. Ethan didn't argue with when I told him. He didn't hesitate. He just nodded. "I'll be there," he said. And for the first time in a long while, he sounded clear. Not confused, not defensive, just ready. We arrived at the office together, not as separate people navigating the same situation, but as something we hadn't been in a long time, a team. Mark was waiting for us. So was someone else, a woman in a dark suit standing near the window flipping through a folder. She turned as we entered. "Ethan Langley?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Karen Holt," she said. The words landed immediately. This had moved beyond investigation. This was legal now. Serious. "Please sit," Mark said. We did. The room felt smaller than it had before. He opened a file and placed it on the table. Then he looked directly at Ethan. "What I'm about to say is based on evidence," he began. "Not assumptions, not speculation." Ethan nodded once. "I understand," Mark continued. "The fire at your property was not accidental. Even though we already knew hearing it said out loud changed something, made it real. Concrete. We found traces of accelerant in the kitchen area," he said. "Combined with altered wiring that created a delayed ignition point." He paused, letting the information settle. "This was a controlled setup," he added. Ethan's hands tightened slightly in his lap, but he didn't speak. Mark turned a page in the file. "We also confirmed that multiple high-value items listed in the insurance claim were removed prior to the fire." Karen Holt stepped forward, then placing another document on the table. "We have records of a storage unit leased under Chloe Langley's name," she said. "Contents match those items." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Not in shock. Not anymore. Just acknowledgement. "And the contractor?" I asked quietly. Mark nodded. "He's cooperating," he said. He confirmed he was paid in cash and instructed to alter the wiring in a way that would not meet safety standards. That was it. The last piece. The final confirmation. The room went still. Because now there was no doubt left. No room for interpretation. Just truth. Karen Holt spoke again. "Based on the evidence, we are moving forward with charges against Chloe Langley," she said. Ethan's head lifted slightly. "What kind of charges?" he asked. Her voice remained steady. "Insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit arson, and reckless endangerment." The words hit hard. Even expected they carried weight. Because this wasn't just about a scheme anymore. This was about consequences. Real ones. "Will Ethan be charged?" I asked before I could stop myself. Both Mark and Karen looked at him, then back at me. "Based on what we've gathered," Karen said carefully, "there's no evidence he was involved in the planning." Ethan exhaled slowly, like he had been holding his breath for days. However, she added, "We may need his testimony." He nodded immediately. "You'll have it," he said. No hesitation, no fear, just clarity. Mark closed the file. "That's why we called you in," he said, "to make sure you understood where things stand." I looked at Ethan, at the quiet strength in his posture, the way he wasn't avoiding anything anymore, And I realized something in that moment. This wasn't the same man who had dismissed my concerns weeks ago. This was someone who had seen the truth and chosen to stand in it. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. Karen answered. "Chloe will be formally charged," she said. "There will be a court process. Evidence will be presented, and you may be called to testify." Ethan nodded again. "I will," he said. No wavering, no doubt, just resolve. We left the office in silence. Not the heavy silence from before. Not the kind filled with uncertainty. This was different. This was the kind of silence that comes after something is settled. As we stepped outside, the air felt clearer, lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because everything was finally understood. Ethan stopped on the sidewalk. "I keep thinking about how close I was," he said quietly. To what I asked, to believing it all, he replied. I didn't respond right away, because there wasn't anything to say that would make that feeling disappear. "You trusted someone you loved," I said gently. "That's not a failure." He looked at me. "But ignoring you was," he said. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "That was a mistake. There's a difference, and it matters." He nodded slowly, then let out a breath. "I don't know how I didn't see it," he admitted. "Because it wasn't obvious," I said. "It was built slowly, piece by piece. That's how these things happen. Not all at once, but gradually. Until one day you look up and realize everything has shifted." Ethan glanced back at the building. "Do you think she ever cared?" he asked. The question lingered. Not simple, not easy. "I think she cared about the outcome," I said carefully. "That's not the same as caring about people." He absorbed that quietly, then nodded. "I guess I had to learn that the hard way." "Yes," I said softly. "But you learned it, and that mattered more than anything else, because in the end, this wasn't just about exposing what Chloe had done. It was about what Ethan chose to do next. And for the first time in a long time, I believed he was going to choose differently. After the truth comes out, people expect things to feel lighter, clean, resolved. But that's not how it works, because even when the lies are gone, the damage remains. Ethan didn't go back to the hotel after that meeting. He came home with me, not permanently, not yet, but long enough to figure out what next looked like. And that turned out to be harder than either of us expected. The first night was quiet, too quiet. He sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at nothing, his hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. I didn't rush him. Some things take time to settle. "You can take the guest room," I said gently as I passed by. He nodded, but didn't move. I turned off the lights in the living room, leaving only the soft glow from the kitchen. And still, he sat there. The next morning, I found him in the same spot. He hadn't slept much. I could tell. "How are you holding up?" I asked. He gave a small shrug. "I don't know yet," he admitted. That was honest, and honesty was something new for him right now. "I keep replaying everything," he said. "Every conversation, every decision." "That's normal," I replied. "Is it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It's what happens when your understanding of something changes." He nodded slowly. "I keep asking myself how I didn't see it," he said. I leaned against the counter. "Because you trusted her," I said. "That's what people do when they love someone." He looked down at the table. "Yeah?" he said quietly. "But love isn't supposed to feel like this." "No, it's not." That day we started going through what was left. Not physical things, Those were either gone or sitting in a storage unit waiting to be processed as evidence. No. We went through his life, his accounts, his responsibilities, his reality, and it wasn't easy. The financial damage alone was overwhelming. Loans stacked on loans. Credit lines pushed beyond what should have been allowed. Payments that had been made without his full understanding. She handled everything he said at one point, his voice hollow. I thought that meant we were a team. It meant she had control, I said gently. He nodded. I see that now. That was the thing about clarity. It doesn't come gradually. It hits all at once. And when it does, you see everything differently. Over the next few days, Ethan started taking steps. Small ones at first, calling lenders, reviewing documents, canceling accounts Chloe had access to. Each action felt heavy, but necessary, like rebuilding something from the ground up, one piece at a time. You don't have to do this alone, I told him more than once. I know, he said, and for once, he meant it. There were moments, though, when the weight of it all pressed down harder than usual. Like the afternoon we went to the storage unit. Mark had arranged for us to access it briefly under supervision. When the door rolled open, the silence between us said everything. Boxes, stacks, carefully organized, not chaotic, not rushed, planned. Ethan stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning the contents. That's the table, he said, quietly pointing. And the TV, the chairs, even the artwork. Carefully organized, not chaotic, not rushed, planned. Ethan stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning the contents. That's the table, he said, quietly pointing. And the TV, the chairs, even the artwork. Everything that had supposedly been lost was sitting right there. Preserved, protected, like it had never been in danger at all. He let out a slow breath. She knew, he said. Yes, I replied. She knew exactly what she was doing. There was no anger in his voice. Not anymore. Just acceptance. And that somehow was harder to hear. We didn't stay long. There wasn't anything else to see. The truth was already there. We just needed to walk away from it. Later that evening, as we sat on the back porch, the air cool and still, Ethan spoke again. I don't think I miss her, he said. I looked at him. Not the way I thought I would, he clarified. That's okay, I said. I think I miss who I thought she was, he added. I nodded. That's the part that's hardest to let go of. The version of someone that only exists in your mind can be more powerful than the real one. I keep thinking about what would have happened if no one had questioned it, he said. If the claim had gone through. If we had gotten the money. He trailed off. You would have built your life on something that wasn't real, I said, and eventually it would have caught up to you. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. It already did. We sat in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable, just still. Peaceful in a quiet way. And then, after a long moment, he said so. And then, after a long moment, he said so, my thing that stayed with me. I think this saved me. I turned to him. What do you mean, the fire? He said. The investigation. You pushy-nung me to see things I didn't want to see, me thing that stayed with me. I think this saved me. I turned to him. What do you mean, the fire? He said. The investigation. You pushing me to see things I didn't want to see. He looked out into the distance. I lost a house, he continued. but I didn't lose myself. I felt something shift in my chest. Because that was the real turning point. Not the charges, not the evidence, but this moment of understanding, of growth, of choosing something better. You didn't lose yourself, I said softly. You found your way back. He looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. Not forced, not polite, real. I guess I did, he said, and in that moment I knew something for certain. We weren't just recovering, we were rebuilding, and this time it would be on something real. Closure doesn't come from a courtroom, it doesn't come from a verdict, and it doesn't come from watching someone face the consequences of their actions. Closure comes quietly, in moments you don't expect, in the way you breathe a little easier, in the way something that used to hurt doesn't quite sting the same anymore. The court process took time. Weeks turned into months. There were hearings, statements, evidence presented piece by piece, just like Mark had promised. Ethan testified. I was there when he did, not sitting beside him, but close enough that he could see me when he needed to. He spoke clearly, calmly, without anger, and that more than anything told me how far he had come. Because the man who once couldn't question Chloe was now standing in front of a room full of strangers, telling the truth about her. Not to hurt her, not to punish her, but because it was the truth, and the truth mattered. Chloe sat across the room during those proceedings. I hadn't seen her since the night Ethan told her to leave. And when I finally did, I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different, but because the control she used to carry so effortlessly was gone, replaced by something else, something quieter, something smaller. Consequences have a way of doing that. They strip away everything that isn't real. In the end, the verdict was what we already knew it would be. Guilty, on multiple counts, insurance fraud, conspiracy, reckless endangerment. The words were formal, legal, but what they meant was simple. She had chosen a path, and now she was facing where it led. Ethan didn't react when the verdict was read, not visibly. He just sat there, still, quiet, and when it was over, he stood up and walked out without looking back. I followed him outside. The sun was bright that day, too bright almost, like the world hadn't quite caught up to what had just happened inside. He stood on the steps for a moment, staring out at nothing. Then he took a slow breath. It's done, he said. Yes, too bright almost, like the world hadn't quite caught up to what had just happened inside. He stood on the steps for a moment, staring out at nothing. Then he took a slow breath. It's done, he said. Yes, I replied, but I knew what he meant. Not the case, not the legal part, something deeper, something personal. I thought I'd feel something, he admitted. What do you feel? I asked. He considered that for a moment, then said, lighter. I nodded, because that made sense. Not happy, not relieved in the way people imagine, just lighter. Like something heavy had finally been put down. What are you had finally been put down? What are you going to do now? I asked. He looked at me, and for the first time since all of this began, there was something steady in his yes. I'm starting over, he said. How going to do now? I asked. He looked at me, and for the first time since all of this began, there was something steady in his eyes. I'm starting over, he said. How slowly, he replied. That was a good answer. The right answer. Because rebuilding a life isn't something you rush. In the weeks that followed, Ethan did exactly that. He found a small apartment. Nothing fancy, just enough. He kept his expenses simple, focused, intentional. He went back to work, not chasing something bigger or better, just doing what was real, what was honest, and piece by piece. He rebuilt, not just his finances, but himself. We still saw each other often, dinner once a week, sometimes more. The conversations were different now, less guarded, more open, more real. I used to think success meant having everything figured out, he said one evening. What do you think now? I asked. I think it means knowing what actually matters, he replied. I smiled, because that was something no one could take from him. One afternoon, months later, we drove past the old property. The house was gone, cleared, nothing left but the foundation. Ethan slowed the car for a moment, looking at it. That used to feel like everything he said. And now I asked. He thought for a moment. Now it feels like a lesson, he said. I nodded. Some lessons are expensive, I said. He gave a small smile. Yeah, he replied. But some are worth it. We didn't stay long. There wasn't a reason to. The past doesn't need to be revisited once you've understood it. That evening, as I sat alone on my porch, the air quiet around me, I thought about everything that had happened. The warning, the doubt, the tension, the truth. And I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I hadn't just been trying to protect Ethan. I had been trying to help him see, because sometimes the hardest thing to do isn't telling someone the truth. It's helping them accept it. And he had, in his own time, in his own way. The phone rang softly beside me. Ethan. Hey, I said. Hey, Mom, he replied. His voice was calm, easy. How was your day? I asked. Good, he said. Simple, but good. I smiled. Simple. There was a time when that word wouldn't have satisfied him. Now, it meant everything. I was thinking, he said after a moment. About what? I asked. About how things could have turned out differently, he replied. I waited. If you hadn't said anything, he continued. If you had just let it go. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I couldn't do that, I said softly. I know, he replied, and I'm glad you didn't. We sat in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, just quiet. Then he said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. You didn't just warn me, he said. You stayed. I closed my eyes for a second, because that was the part that mattered most. Not being right, not being proven right, but staying. Through the doubt, through the tension, through the truth. I always will, I said, and this time I knew he believed me. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we don't want to hear from the people closest to us. But ignoring them doesn't make them disappear. It only gives them time to grow. This story isn't just about betrayal or justice. It's about trust, about the quiet strength it takes to stand by someone when they're lost, and about the courage it takes to face reality when it hurts. If you've ever been in a situation where your instincts told you something wasn't right, but no one else would listen, what did you do? Did you speak up? Or did you stay silent? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more stories like this, and